Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley, and I am a machine learning program manager at Google.
And I'm Lawrence, and I'm a machine learning developer advocate at Google.
And we are both people of AI.
So join us as we meet some of the most interesting people in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence.
You will meet leaders, practitioners, amateurs in the field of AI and ML, and how they ended up where they are today, what they have learned along the way, and their outlook on the future.
Sounds exciting. Shall we do it?
Let's jump right in. This podcast is sponsored by Google. Any remarks made by the speakers are their own and are not endorsed by Google. We're going to be talking about the people of AI and what that means. And we're both people of AI. Mm-hmm. And so I would love for us to just explore and get to know each other a bit better and talk about where we fit in this big space of AI and machine learning. So with that, please, I'd love to, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. And I really love that idea and that concept because there really is a place for everybody in this. And I think one of the things that a lot of people face when they think about the field of AI is that this is not for me. I'm not smart enough. I don't have the right skills and that kind of thing. But there really is a place in it, I think, for everybody. And I mean, if it'll accept a guy like me, it'll accept anybody. So for me, I think my start was very interesting in that I studied physics in university and I graduated with a physics degree right into the middle of a huge recession.
Oh, gosh.
And of course, nobody was hiring. And I had a little joke at the time was that, that's how I kept myself going with my own little jokes. And as a physicist, you study the source code of the universe. So I figured, source code can't be that hard. And ended up doing like some computing and I like retrained and ended up getting a master's and was able to get into the field of software engineering. And I guess I talk a lot. So that got me into the area of then doing advocacy and then moved through a number of different companies doing advocacy before landing in Google. But one of the things that had happened during the period when I had nothing to do was that there was an interesting thing that the British government, and I lived in the UK at the time, started a program like way back in 1992. So this was amazing foresight on their part, that they wanted to create a cohort of 20 people who knew AI.
Oh, wow.
And then the idea, this cohort of 20 people, could maybe give advice to different industries or maybe do some government work and that kind of thing to really help pick up the economy because it was suffering at the time, potentially using AI as a driving factor. Of course, it was way too early and it failed miserably, but I was actually the first person that they selected to be part of this cohort. And so I got bitten by the bug way back then. And then it was like, many, many years later, and as TensorFlow got open sourced and, Google really started getting into building the AI community, that's where I was able to get re-involved and able to reignite that passion and continue to do that.
What a great story. I want to go back for a second and ask you about that moment when you were talking about the British government starting this program. And you also talked about this great metaphor of learning the source code of the universe. Where did this interest in AI start? It sounded like from your journey that you kind of picked up coding as a separate thing to do and then kind of fell in love with that and sort of ended up taking you into this incredible direction. But I'd like to hit on that moment of what was that spark or how did that spark start? Was it like love at first sight or was it like, oh, actually I'm figuring things out as I go along and things are becoming more and more interesting. So tell us a little bit more about that interest and that spark with machine learning and AI.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. I think there was some element of pragmatism where it was, I was living in one of the world's most expensive cities and I was unemployed and I needed to pick up a skill that would be useful and that would be employable. And then the second part of it, of course, is the ability to be able to make changes, to be able to build things by, writing a few lines of code on a computer to be able to do something that could impact and change people's lives or do things a little differently. I had started tinkering a little bit while I was studying physics, and in some ways I was able to change my studies and do some stuff by writing code instead of doing things manually in some of my scientific experiments when I was studying the physics. And I think that's when the bug really started to bite. But the reality was the pragmatism meant I needed to do something. And when they put out this call for people to take a battery of tests to see if they could be part of that cohort, I thought, why not me? And so I went and I did the tests and I was very surprised to be the first one that they selected. And like I said, unfortunately it failed, but it was really interesting to see to be a part of what the perception of artificial intelligence was. And the reason why it failed was that there is perception and there's reality.
Mhm.
And at that time, 30 plus years ago, the reality just couldn't keep up with the perception. And that's one thing that's very different now. I think with the stuff that we can do, the reality of the things that, anybody can now open a browser and go to Colab and have all of this processing power at their fingertips, and open source TensorFlow or open source PyTorch or whatever, it doesn't have to be ours, that they can start like creating neural networks, the kind of things that only the top people in the world could have done just a few years ago. And it's like that widening access is what's leading to this Cambrian explosion of AI and machine learning, and like opening up new business lines, opening up new opportunities, and all of those kind of things. So, that dream from 30 years ago is now a reality, and it's great to come full circle and be a part of it.
That's incredible. So it sounds like the bug really is that this technology, you've seen how this technology is really helping others and enabling others. Can you share maybe some examples
Sure.
of how you've seen that technology take shape in our society and help others?
Sure. I mean, there's so many, but one of my personal favorites is we actually have it on the YouTube channel, so youtube.com/TensorFlow, and it's called Air Cognizer. And what Air Cognizer is that the concept behind it is it was some students, high school students in India, and in some of the major cities in India, there was a lot of severe pollution. But what they wanted to do was they realized that their parents or their grandparents could be severely impacted by this pollution. And they wanted to see if there's a way that they could help them avoid it. And unfortunately, like if you turn on the news, you'll get an air quality reading, but that's the air quality reading at the sensor. That's not necessarily the same as the air quality reading outside your front door.
Mm.
And they realized that with machine learning and with computer vision, that they could get like their own air quality sensor. They could take a photograph of the sky, and then they could label the sky with the air quality reading, take lots of photographs like this, build a model that says, hey, when the sky looks like this, the AQI is this, and put that into a mobile app. And now their parents can just open the mobile app, stick their phone out the window, take a picture of the sky, and then get an air quality reading local to them, without having to carry the meter and without having to trust a sensor that might be very, very far away. And as a result, it was a bunch of high school students built this, and they've
That's
shared this
incredible.
app. And then just simple things like that you can do to do something that previously wasn't possible is really what wakes me up every morning and gets me like out of bed and go, oh my gosh, look at these things that I never would have thought of that. And there's a billion other ideas out there where people can do things to improve the world that you haven't thought of, I haven't thought of, Google hasn't thought of. But if we build the platform and open up the platform to make it possible for others to do that, that's when the change will really, truly come.
That's an incredible story. And I know from working with you and from working at Google that there are many more examples like that.
So I'd love to hear your story.
um, so I am actually from Geneva, Switzerland. This is where I was born and raised. And I grew up in sort of a very liberal arts kind of environment. I was very focused on the arts, the outdoors, and ended up going to college in the United States and ended up being an East Asian Studies major.
Nice.
So I studied anthropology with a focus on China, where I was learning about Chinese history, art, culture, language. And I too graduated, not in the middle of a recession, but kind of, in 2010. So 2 years later, and definitely was like you, like, oh, well, what am I going to do with a degree in East Asian Studies? And so I thought, I'll go study Chinese. And so I bought a one-way ticket to Shanghai and put myself through my own immersion program.
Wow.
Where I signed up at Shanghai Waigui Daxue, where I studied there, and then I ended up finding the Craigslist of China, and ended up finding a room and 2 roommates and lived with them, and then made friends by playing badminton in the park. So I've have this philosophy of like, just go, don't plan, just kind of do it and get in it. And I ended up staying for 6 years. And was very much in the field. I was a college counselor for 2 years. I started up an after-school drama program and got married when I was there. And then I came back to the U.S. And because my husband is Chinese, we decided to move to the Bay Area. So I came here and I was like, all right, I need a job and I need So I took any job. And so I ended up becoming an executive assistant and then got hired into Google, was an executive business partner to the director of product for TensorFlow, and also working with your team, with the DevRel team, which ended up being my favorite team. And so here I am, as you can see from my story, just had no technical background whatsoever. And so I slowly started to learn everything I could. And I was reading everything and watching your YouTube videos.
And you're still talking to me.
And it's still talking to you. Well, it's been very instrumental.
I
It's
haven't
helped me
scared
learn
you
a lot.
off.
No. And quite the opposite. Because I'm now a program manager on your team. And so I converted from being an assistant to a program manager. So that's my personal and professional journey.
I think one other really interesting thing is careers. And I'll go back to my own particular story, that it was needing a career was one of the triggers that got me into this. And the future growth in careers around AI and ML is projected to be massive. But you end up in a vicious circle if you're not careful. Because if you don't have the people, the companies can't hire the people to be able to build the way they want to build. And if the companies aren't building the way they want to build, they won't be able to hire the people. So one of the things that we've really been interested in and investing in is really helping people build careers in AI and ML. And through teaching, we have like online MOOCs that we teach and a certificate program that people can then, learn from and show and prove their skills. And one of our goals at Google is not to make money off of this or anything like that, but really just to widen access globally, to seed, communities globally. And we're beginning to see like a lot of the people who are picking up on these certificates, and hopefully many of them will be guests on this podcast, have been able to kind of turn themselves into career-worthy ML engineers. And then they're getting hired by companies who really needed that type of skill. And all of this has kind of grown out of nothing. And I think, that's one of the things that is again, a huge passion here at Google, is to really see what can we do to seed the community like that. And one of the wonderful things about working in this environment is that it's not profit driven. We're out here to build a community, to benefit everybody. It's a case of what can we do to build a better community? And let's see what the results of that are going to be.
That makes a lot of sense, and thank you for sharing. And I've also seen that, from working on this team. One of the things that I think a lot about is that this is such an incredible new wave of technology, and I have heard the term disruption. That this is a technology that's going to be disruptive, and I see all the efforts that we, as the DevRel team, as well as Google, is putting into making sure that we bridge that gap between this growing field of technology and making sure that we bring on the workforce close and keep it close. But the technology is moving so fast, and I do see that there is this widening gap. Is that something that you think at all about, or is it something that worries you? I know for me, it definitely worries me, and it's something that I do think a lot about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously, when things move really fast, it's very easy for people to be left behind. And so when cases like that are happening, it's always good to look at the past, to learn from history so that you don't repeat it. And it's one of the things where I'm much more optimistic maybe than most about this, because I came from a past where the access, like when I first moved out into the career field, the thing that was exploding was the internet. And, this whole thing called the World Wide Web, that was a science fiction concept that most people didn't understand. But when you wanted to get involved in it, to build in it, the skills that you needed to get were very hard to attain. They were very expensive to attain. The tools that you needed to get to be able to build for it, it would probably be 2 or 3 months' salary just to buy the tool. But if, like me at the time, you're unemployed, you don't have 2 or 3 months' salary.
Right.
And actually being able to get your foot in the door to begin with was incredibly difficult. So now we fast forward to the next revolution beyond that, to me, was the advent of mobile. And we became a mobile-first world. And then the next one is the upcoming AI and ML one, or the one that we're in the middle of at the moment. But if I kind of draw a line to how difficult it was to be involved in those earlier revolutions, you'll end up seeing that the skill sets and the center of economy and economics and these things tended to be Western Europe and the west coast of the United States because of the expense of getting involved. But now, like I was saying earlier on, like frameworks are free and open source, environments that you can use to create in them. One of the barriers for AI is being able to use a GPU. GPUs are really expensive. They're used in gaming, they're used in Bitcoin mining and all of these kind of things. And for somebody who's getting started, an expensive GPU is a hard proposition. But then things like Colab will give you access to GPUs in the cloud at no cost. And there's all of these efforts being done, not just by us, but by the industry as a whole, to say, like, what can we do to lower the barrier of entry so we can raise the floor of people being able to get into this? And there's still a gap, but I think the gap is like minuscule compared to what it was in the previous revolutions. And that's something that makes me very excited and makes me very bullish about it. And that's, the strategy that we try to drive forward at Advocacy is to remember that, so when we launch things like the certificate, when we've launched things like the training programs, we always want to make sure that there's a no-cost tier, because $50 in the United States may not be expensive to some people, but in some parts of the United States it is. In some parts of the world it's incredibly expensive. And what can we do to kind of reduce those barriers of entry as much as possible? And they are still there. But like I said, if I draw a line from 30 years in the past to today, the barriers have come down dramatically and they're heading in that downward direction. So I still have hope.
I'm with you there. I'm definitely an optimist. I'm cautiously optimistic, but an optimist nonetheless. And I myself have experienced that because, I have no technological background. I definitely have like the biggest set of imposter syndromes that there is. And again, I don't have a technology background, was never really interested in the computer sciences, terrible at math. Like I said,
yet here you are.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I've had definitely a lot of help along the way. But I think what has helped me in my journey is to be aggressively curious and understanding. And I think this vision of sort of zooming in and out and understanding what is it that we're doing at a granular level? Why is it important? Why is it that the people are investing in this technology? I think just this level of curiosity and learning and having conversations, I think is my biggest takeaway for how I've been able to progress my career in this field. So if I were to give any feedback to anyone who's thinking, like, how do I get into this field? There are a ton of resources that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, but I think just getting curious about what this technology is, understanding what the realities of it actually are, and then exploring the different resources around it is really an excellent way to get into the field. And I think what's really wonderful is that the field of AI is not just filled with engineers. It is filled with program managers and folks in marketing and developer advocates and executive assistants and executives. And there's a whole team of people that run and that contribute to the building of these technologies and that make sure that they are UX researchers who test that and make sure that this technology is made available and accessible to everyone, that we are building responsibly, that we're doing it in an efficient way, a cost-effective way, an environmentally friendly way. And there are many, many different roles within that. So my thought was like, oh, well, I have to study coding and I have to be a computer scientist in order to enter the field of artificial intelligence. And that's not true anymore. I think when you started, that probably was true. But as you said, the barriers have come down. And that's what's truly wonderful about being in this space is that it is exciting, it is creative, and there is a lot of work to be done on all aspects to make sure that this technology is going to be beneficial for all of us moving forward.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Put a lot of thought into
I hope we caught that. That was gold.
Thank you.
You used a couple of words there, and I used them earlier on as well, and that's imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And it's like, I'm sure you faced it, and I know I faced it. And I mean, when you faced imposter syndrome, like, how have you dealt with it? How have you overcome it? Or are we there yet? I'm not sure I'm fully there yet myself.
No, I feel like it's like a lifelong hat that we all wear. I think for me, it's really putting the imposter syndrome aside and putting on the curiosity hat. I
Mm.
think curiosity for me has been the driving force that has unlocked the ability to move forward.
Mhm.
So oftentimes when I feel imposter syndrome, it's often driven by anxiety of like, oh, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, smart enough. And if I can put that aside and say, okay, well, what am I interested in? And I let that guide me. That's what has helped unlock me and allowed me to learn something new, to try something new, to talk to someone
Mhm.
new. It's really that curiosity, which is also why I'm so excited about this podcast, because it allows me to be curious about others and in the field of AI.
Mm.
And so that's what I would say is try whenever you can to put that curiosity learning hat on and continue to be a lifelong learner. What would you say,
Well,
Lawrence?
first of all, that is wonderful advice, and I would say exactly the same thing.
I think that's what's super interesting about this technology and being in this field is it is a field for really creative people
Hmm. Hmm.
as well. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I have a crazy creative urge, and it's like this is one of the things that's helped me to channel that. And to be honest, I think the things that are going to be created that will have the most value are not the ones that look like what we've seen in movies. Right. And in
Right.
movies, we've seen flying cars, but they haven't shown up yet in reality. And Blade Runner, one of my favorite movies, predicted flying cars in 2019. And that's 3 years ago now. And I still don't have one.
Well, speaking of movies, what is your favorite AI movie?
Oh, boy. That's a really good question. I love so many, but I think it was called Her, but it might be called She.
No, it's Her.
It's Her,
Yes,
right? And it's the one with
yes.
Joaquin Phoenix, and
Yes.
he has the assistant in his ear.
Yeah, and Scarlett Johansson.
Scarlett Johansson's his assistant. And what I really loved about that movie was, if you remember, there was a scene where he went away to camp in the woods, and then he came and he turned her off, and then he came back, and like only a week has passed for him. But for her, and they'd had a great relationship before this, but because her life moves so much faster, it's almost like a million years had passed for her, and they'd suddenly become so distant. And that becomes like the moment of conflict in the movie. And it just,
Yes.
that really got me thinking, about like the difference in technology and reliance on technology. And, if there is like some kind of like self-intelligent technology as opposed to artificially intelligent technology. And, even a little thing that he thought was harmless, that he treated her, ended up really mistreating her and hurting her. And it was like, oh my gosh, that was like one of those movies that just made my head blow open, that kind of thing. And it was like just amazing things that could, that they explored in the story. And so I got to give kudos to them. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that movie as well. And you can see this kind of in real life too, about how sort of the model ends up learning on itself, and then just it gets faster and faster and learns more and more. And I take it in the movie that I can kind of see in real life how that would actually happen, because I've seen it happen in technologies, like Translate, right? The more the model's exposed to different words, the better translation, the better it gets at translating. So it's cool now that I'm on sort of the back end to see how that could actually be real. And that's also really interesting to see how technology, in many ways, and AI has been inspired by the ideas that we've had long, long ago, and how we've, in many ways, sci-fi has geared us and sort of paved a roadmap of what we want to do, and then we try to recreate it based on these movies. And one of my favorite AI movies is called The Love Bug.
Oh,
And
that's Herbie, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. It's Herbie the little bug and it was filmed in San Francisco in
1969, I
yes,
believe.
exactly,
Yes.
1969. So the premise of the movie, for those who haven't seen it, is that the bug has a mind of its own, and it has its own personality. I love this because this is set in like 1969,
Yeah.
and we have self-driving cars like now in 2020, and it also just made me think again how sort of the role that sci-fi and movies and literature and books can play on the imagination. And I think the longer I work in this field with engineers and dev rollers and program managers and product managers and marketers, I see that this is really, honestly, a really creative space, which is something that draws me personally, being a creative. We are building a lot of really interesting things, but the ideas behind this is what's really interesting to me, right? As we use our imagination to create, like Love Bug, these little self-driving cars. And, now before you know it, in San Francisco itself, we have them.
And I think it's the things where the real innovation is going to happen is like not in the things and it's the people who are creative enough to think about like, here's an amazing application where we can change the world with a new application of technology. Like the kids I mentioned in India with the air cognizer, those are the things that 20, 30 years from now, when we look back, we'll be like, this is amazing things. The world's a better place as a result of it. Why didn't I think of that? And it's like, and that's what I'm really looking forward to most, that like, I have a limited mind that will help me think about what's next. But that limited mind might only see the smallest sliver of it, because the more brains that we can get out there working with these technologies, working on solving real problems, the more innovation that will happen. And the more of these like solutions that come up that like, this is amazing. Why didn't I think of it? Like when we look back in a few years' time, will be that to me is the really exciting part. I just hope it's not as many as 30 years. I hope it's more like 5 or 10 years, but who knows?
Years. We can only hope. We can only hope.
Exactly.
And in the meantime, I think focusing on the subtle ways that AI and ML are also helping us through, like, one of my favorite things is on my Pixel phone, instead of typing the letters, I can sort of draw on the keyboard. It's a cool tool.
It really
it's a cool
is.
tool. Yeah. And again, I always sort of zoom in and out, right? I always have this like, let's zoom out and do like a big bird's eye view, and then let's zoom in. And I find that a lot of the work of being in technology, but also being in AI is a lot of that. It's a lot of like zooming in really, really tiny. And, when we do, a prediction, the 0.0% accuracy versus 0.9 accuracy is only, one digit, but it's the difference between whether we can trust the model or not. And then you zoom out to like, well, what are we building, and why does this matter, and where does this all go? So I'm hoping that through this podcast, we'll be able to explore and zoom in to the details of how this technology affects people's lives on a very minute, detailed way. And then zoom out to like, why does this matter? Why is this important? And how is this going to benefit us as a society? And those are really the questions that I hope to explore as we interview and bring on more people of AI into our podcast.
Sign me up.
Thank you so much, Laurence, for being here on the podcast today and for sharing all of your wonderful stories and insights. And I am so excited to continue to co-host with you and bring on our next guest. This was really a treat and such an honor.
The honor's all mine.
So thank you. Thank you. And if you would like to learn more about the show, please hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in to our next episode where we will bring on our next person of AI, and see you soon.
See you soon.